already seen a number of different types of data collections or data structures within our learning so far. We've had the items collections in controls such as image list, list box, and combo box that can contain multiple items that we can pull from or select. And then in memory we saw an array as a variable that can contain multiple values, and it's static in nature. And then we saw the array list, which is dynamic in nature but very similar to an array. And then we saw a list, which also is dynamic, and as I said, probably the data collection or data structure that I use the most. But there's a few others, and in this lesson we're going to look at queues and stacks, and then in a future lesson we'll look at dictionaries. But that isn't exhaustive. There are also hash tables and binary trees that are a little more advanced and go beyond the scope of this course. But let's talk about queues and stacks. Both queues and stacks are collections that allow us to add items into the collection and then remove the items in an orderly fashion. And that's the difference between the queue and the stack, is how it removes the items. So in a queue, we call this a FIFO, which stands for first in, first out. An analogy of this might be standing in line to get into a theater, and the first person in line is the first person out of the line and into the theater. The second person in line is the second person out of the line and into the theater. So it's a first in, first out approach. The command that we use to put something in the queue is called enqueue. So it might be myqueue.enqueue, pass the item we want in the collection. And then to get an item out of the collection, we issue the dequeue command or method, and that's going to take the first item out, and then the next item, and so forth. So it's always going to take the top item out. A stack is very similar, but how it removes the items is different. This is a LIFO, last in, first out. An example I can give you of this might be, consider we're taking an elevator down a high rise, and 5 people get on, each on different floors. And so the first person in is going to move to the back of the elevator to let the next person in, and so forth. So we have 5 people in our elevators after stopping at 5 floors. We get down to the bottom floor, and the first person out of the elevator is going to be the last person in. So here we use a push command to add an item into the stack, and a pop command to remove the last item out of the stack. Now when I say last item, it's the last item in. So in our example here, let's say that the first in our elevator is Edith, and then Dwayne, and then Carol, and then Betty, and then Alan. And the doors open, and Alan is the first one out, and then Betty, and then Carol, and then Dwayne, and then Edith. Some people have used the analogy of a stack of a bunch of cafeteria trays. And if we consider we stack those trays one on top of another, one at a time, and then the patron who goes to use the cafeteria tray, they're going to take the very top one. Well, that was the last one on the stack. So it's a last in is the first out. Let's go over to Visual Basic and look at this. So in this application, I've created a queue and a stack in memory, which I call my queue and my stack. And then I've got 2 list boxes that are going to show the values of the queue and the stack. A text box, so you see the word Alan there, and an in button that will add Alan to, or add the text to both the queue and the stack. And in doing that, it will use enqueue to add the item to the queue and push to add the item to the stack. And then an out button that will remove an item from both the queue and the stack. Now that out button is going to use the dequeue to remove the first item into the queue, and it'll use a pop command to remove the last item added from the stack. Let's take a look at that working. I'm going to add Alan in. We'll add in Betty, Carol, Dwayne, and Edith. And you can see in the example here, the order that these are listed in the list boxes, which are not sorted, is in the queue, each new item is added at the bottom. But in the stack, each new item is added at the top. If I choose out, we're going to see that Alan is removed from the queue and Edith is removed from the stack. And then Betty and Dwayne are removed. Carol's being in the center is removed from both of them. Dwayne and Betty, and Edith and Alan. How these are removed between the queue and the stack is just the opposite between the two. Now, how do we use that? Well, over here I have a queue that I've created being represented by this list box, and I want to generate numbers randomly between 1 and 20. But I never want to generate the same number that's been generated within the last 10 times. So I want to add each number into the queue and make sure that my new random number is not in the queue before I generate a new number. Once we hit 10 numbers in that queue, I'm going to use the dequeue to remove an item. So if there's always 10 numbers in the queue, none of which would be the next number. Let's try this. So I'm going to put in a bunch of numbers between 1 and 20. These are randomly generated. And you'll see there are no duplicates. 4, 1, 8, 7, 10, 12, 17, 15, 20, 11. And now we're going to see the 4 disappear as I add a new number, and it's 3. And I can keep adding new numbers. Again, none of the new numbers replicate any of the past 10. And eventually we should see a 4 come back up here. But again, as you're looking at the list, there are no duplicates. Obviously, the odds of choosing 4 have gone beyond what I'm selecting here, but we should eventually get a 4. We've seen other numbers come more than once. There's the 4. So it wasn't in any of the previous 10. And again, all these numbers of the 10 that are listed here are unique. Really quickly, let's take a look at the code for that. So you can see here my queues and my stacks that are created, the in button, the out button, and then I have a method to update all the list. But here's that button that generates the random number. So I used RND as my new random object. Next num is an integer. I'm going to do next num equals RND next 20 plus 1. I'm going to value between 1 and 20. And then I'm going to loop while numq.contains next num. If it contains that number in the last 10, I'm going to generate a new number. Once I found a number that's not in the queue, then I'm going to add it to the queue using the enqueue. And if the count of my queue, numq, is greater than 10, I'm going to dequeue the item at the top of that list. And then my update list simply updates the list box. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.